Good morning, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Sideropoulos. I'm the director of the South African Institute of International Affairs, and it's really lovely to be able to welcome you here to Johannesburg on the eve of the second FOCAC summit, and the first in Africa, but of course the sixth FOCAC meeting. Wonderful to be able to co-host this event this morning with the ODI and in particular, and I never get this acronym right, but maybe I should dispense with the acronym, and it's really with the DFID ESRC Growth Research Program, which has the elegant acronym of DOGB or DGRP. Anyway, it's great to be sharing the platform with Louise, but I'll introduce her a little later. No doubt many of you will have seen the headlines in the newspaper this morning, in the Business Day, and no doubt in some of the other papers. Deals, accords worth 94 billion rand signed yesterday. This is, of course, referring to the state visit and the. I think it's reflective, really, of the very important relationship that South Africa has with China. Although, of course, the purpose of this discussion this morning is really to look at it in the broader context of China-Africa relations. But I think what happened yesterday really is the precursor of a series of announcements over the next couple of days around the China-Africa relations, which we've become used to, 15 years into the FOCAC process. Of course, when we talk about the China-Africa relationship, the first point that people tend to speak about is the fact that the trade relationship was simply a mere $2 billion, and that the relationship has mushroomed to over $200 billion. And certainly it's China's phenomenal economic success and engagement with Africa over the last decade and a half has played a very important role in Africa's own narrative that has become known as Africa Rising. I would say we're now in a different phase of that relationship, and that's partly due not only to developments in China, but also more globally. But it nevertheless, I think, remains an important. What are the opportunities and what are the risks that might be associated with that? It's almost been as the new phase or second phase in the relationship between China and Africa in the context of FOCAC. I think, however, as the recent agreements, if you look at the papers this morning show, between South Africa and China, I think there are production and so on in South Africa. And these dimensions are not only important for South Africa's own economic trajectory, but they're also a framework as it's been reflected in Agenda 2063, the AU, the African Union's Agenda 2063, the key element of industrialization and building up a manufacturing base. I end with the following points, that I think from an African perspective, it is also very important for us to ensure that we have the right policy frameworks in place and that these are able to respond to a dynamic environment. I think if that's the one, if there is one lesson to learn from the way in which China's phenomenal economic trajectory has played itself out over the last 30 or so years, is its ability to be dynamic and to adapt to changing circumstances. I think that those correct policy contexts are important so that we can. But I am not the expert on most of these things. I think we'll have a series of very good presenters and discussants over the course of the morning and in the afternoon. It now gives me a great pleasure to welcome and to introduce Louise Shaxson from the ODI. She will introduce herself more specifically, but she'll also tell you a little bit about the DEGRP.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Elizabeth, for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I'm delighted to be here as co-host of today's event and working with such a respect put together this morning representing Africa and China. As Elizabeth said, there's been a massive amount in the papers yesterday, and our SAIIA Growth Research Programme, it does have a difficult acronym, but I'm sorry, bear with us, we're stuck with it. It's funded both by the UK's Department for International Development and by the UK's Economic and Social Research Council, and it supports world-class research on inclusive growth in low-income countries. It's specifically research that emphasises structural economic transformation and research that has a high potential for impact on policy and practice. So our programme has 4 main themes, and China-Africa is one of those: finance and innovation. And what's really interesting is to note the emerging links between the different areas. So, for example, we recently hosted an event on innovation in Africa, and we discussed what types of innovation help spur inclusive economic growth. Growth that reaches the poor, growth that reaches the women, and growth that reaches other marginalised groups. And interestingly, I think what we heard was that these may not necessarily be the high-tech innovations that people are talking about, that you see a lot of in the newspapers. Innovations that support inclusive economic growth may be the technologies that are not necessarily all that environmentally friendly, that are low-tech enough to be adapted to the African economic and business context, particularly in the low-income and the emerging economies. And this gives rise to further questions that I think are of real relevance today. As relations between China and Africa intensify, how can we ensure that they help to put African countries on a path to inclusive economic growth? So I don't want to say much more than this.